co-anchor for the morning show of Fusion Network. Welcome. She actually worked for the council one summer. And then Alexandra Aguirre, who is a shareholder of Greenberg Traurig and actually is the inspiration for doing this panel because she's been doing this with us for some time, and she was just inspirational because she too is an amazing professional and a model. And Jocelyn Cortez Young, CEO and founding partner of Minerva Capital, who's also been following us around. And finally, Nina Johnson Milewski, did I say that right?
Yes.
Owner and director of Gallery VA. And we're really happy that we could have and introduce the arts into the program as well. So with that, I am going to pass this to you, Mariana.
Thank you, Susan. Hi, everyone. It's great to see this wonderful group of women. I woke up today at 2:30 a.m. That's what you do when you host a morning show, but I'm thrilled to be here. And hopefully I won't fall asleep after the panel's over. As Susan mentioned, I did intern for the council in 2006. I'm a former reporter for Univision, and now I do the morning show for Fusion, which is an ABC Univision joint venture, and we launched a month and a half ago. And this issue, the women in the workplace issue, especially for young women in their late 20s and 30s, is a major issue for our generation. You know, even as we saw the list of Fortune 500 companies this year, with a record breaking of female CEOs and a single urban women are earning men, women in their 20s, we still see that this record-breaking number of female CEOs is only 3.6%, and the gender gap is huge in the majority of the country. So what can we do about that? And I think as women, a great thing that we do is talk about stuff. And I think that this has proven to be very helpful in just venting and, you know, finding sort of that cathartic solution you know, to what we can do and what we can do to shape the next generation of women in America. So for that, I'm joined by you three wonderful ladies. I just want you to introduce yourselves briefly, and you three are very successful. So if you could just briefly tell me your personal stories of success and what were the major obstacles that you had to overcome to get to where you are.
Well, first of all, I started in business school, and I thought that's what I was going to do because I'm originally from Guatemala, and I always loved the law, but there came a point in time when I decided I can't stay in Guatemala. So I can't practice law because that means staying in Guatemala, going to law school in Guatemala. So I went to the United States to study business. After business school, I said, you know what, I'm staying in the United States. Why don't I go back to my original passion and go to law school? So I finished law school, and I started at a big firm. And I really just, you know, I was very focused. I wasn't looking at anything other than working hard, which I think is still super important. And I always had, you know, partnership track in mind. And I mean, but to tell you the truth, if you're in your 20s and you're here, you're way ahead of where I was at the time, because I really wasn't even thinking of any sort of women's leadership issues when I was a junior associate. I was just focused on working hard, and you know, they talked about indentured servitude when you're a junior associate, and that's definitely the case. You know, so it's basically just surviving those years. But I think the reason why Susan, you know, wanted me on this panel is because my story is a little different than many other attorneys in big law firms, which is the fact that I have a female mentor and sponsor, which is Patricia Menendez-Campbell. And you really don't see that, especially we're in the corporate M&A cross-border field. It's really Patricia and me. And
can I interrupt you briefly, Alex? How did she become your sponsor? Is that something you discussed with her?
No. I really, like I said, that's what I'm saying. If you're here, you're way ahead of me. I wasn't even thinking when I was a junior associate of finding a mentor, finding a sponsor. I really just, it was a blessing. I didn't realize what a blessing it was until I was almost like a partner. I think when you go through the ranks, you realize that you do have to have a padrino, which it should be a madrina in my case, as we call it in Miami. but I didn't realize what a special case I had with somebody as great as Patricia being my mentor and my sponsor the whole way through, until I really got to the top and I looked around and there's no women around me. It's really unfortunate, and that's why I think that what Susan and the council is doing is so important, because if we can do anything that we can do to keep these 20-something young women in the workforce, I think that's really the solution, because like she said, it's too difficult to change it from the top at this point. We really have to change it from the bottom and do whatever we can to support these women that are in their 20s to stay in the workforce to make it to the top. And I can tell you that Patricia is basically talking the talk and walking the walk, and she completely changed my career, and I can tell you, I'm sure I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for her, just in the sense that we are in a very, very tough career, but there are interesting areas of it. Otherwise, people wouldn't do it. But as a young associate, if you're not exposed to clients, if you're not going to pitches, if you're not being trained properly, if you're not, being exposed to the more interesting aspects of a career, you're probably not going to stick around, because if they really lock you up in an office to draft contracts for 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, you're probably going to jump out the window and quit. It's just that's the way it works. And she really took the time to train me and to take me under her wing, and she always took me along with her for the ride. And then there's also the sense of you being with a woman. You don't really appreciate it until later on. I look back and think how special it was that I was along the ride with a woman, because I really look at her as my older sister. I don't think that you can, I'm sure a lot of people here had male mentors. I think most of the people had to have male mentors here because there were no other choices. But it's really so special to have a relationship with another woman. When we travel together all the time, and it really, makes it enjoyable to work as well, which is key, obviously, to staying in the career choice and not, throwing the towel and just saying, I'm staying home with the kids, which is tough, and you need a lot of support. I have a supportive husband, and obviously I have Patty, and that helps a lot, because obviously, when I have 3 little kids, 6, 4, and 1, and it's tough, and a lot of times you're just...
6, 4, and 1.
6, 4, and 1, yeah. So you're at that age that, there's days that you really think about it, but then, my husband's like, you're not quitting, that's just not happening. I'm quitting before you're quitting, so go back to work, you're a good example for our girls, stick it out, you're like, okay, and he tells you the story. He has 3, restaurants. He's like, what are you complaining about? You're friends with all the people that you work with, you're in a nice office, you travel. I have poor people working at my pizza place that are earning like $10 an hour, working 12 days a week, 7 days a week, 12 hours a day. And I'm like, he's right, you really have to look at it from that perspective. But going back to my original point, it's like I have a supportive husband, and you really do need a lot of support, inside of your firm, from mentors and sponsors, in your private life, from your spouse or your parents. As with the previous panel, I have a wonderful nanny too, because obviously neither my husband or I can pick up my kids from school. I can't be the homeroom mom, but you have to, it's great to go to these places. Well, for us, when you hear stories from, the other generation, that they give you the reassurance, your kids are going to be fine, you're going to be fine, your marriage is going to be fine, you need to hear that too,
Jocelyn, do you have a mentor?
Actually, I had several mentors. I think, in my career, I came out of, the corporate servant, as has been used before. I originally started with Goldman Sachs, and I was always in the proprietary trading side of the business. And what ended up happening was I was always the first female on a derivatives desk, the first female that started a fund, that was the first female, the second female to join my YPO group. And, it gets to a point where it's like, my husband tells me, he's like, Justin, how many firsts are you gonna, end up doing? But I think, from my perspective, from being an entrepreneur's perspective, I never knew I was going to be an entrepreneur until 2009 during the financial crisis. The financial crisis was actually a small, very small window where all the terrible things that happened, I'm an example of something good that happened. Because if it wasn't for the financial crisis, Minerva would have never been born, and the opportunity to do the fund that I did and am doing would never have been born. So the lesson there is learn how to take risks, learn how to understand what risk it is that you're taking, and once you find that risk and you are taking that on, make sure you align yourself with your passions. And what I mean, I knew that to take the risk of starting a fund was for me, which is also something else you need to ask yourself, is this volatility, is this going up, is this going down, is that something I can live with? That was number one. But number two was, how do I take what I have achieved and how do I align it with a passion that I have in life? And my passion, one of it was having a double bottom line fund, which is something that we do now. It's basically, we look for gender parity, you invest with us. If we lend you money and you're a company A, B, and C, we're gonna ask for you to have 20% women on your board, 20% women on your management team. It is what I do. But the fact that I took the risk is what allows me, it permits me to be able to sit on the table and to do the terms and conditions of how I wanna run my business. So to answer your question on mentors along the way, I would say I've had ear whisperers. And what that means is, depending on what I'm doing, depending on what is happening in my career, I have had different people from different sectors that comes to me and says, hey, listen, tell me a little bit about what you're doing. I want to hear a little bit about what's going on. And before you know it, you're reaching certain levels and certain people are hearing about what you're doing because it's different. You're taking on the challenge and you're taking the risk of being different.
Jocelyn, is that something that you think can be copied? Is that a model to follow across America?
I think it's something that you need to assess. There's this saying in finance, and I know we're finance and law and different sectors here, but there's a terminology in finance that's called P&L experience, profit and loss experience. And you can apply that concept to the decisions you make. If you are going to start a business, if you are going to invest in a company, if you are going to make a relationship with someone, you need to understand the P&L effect of that. What does it mean to have this person on board? What does it mean to have certain people following you and certain people being promoters of what you do? And so when you're able to categorize what you're doing in that format, it becomes quite simple. Because the way you approach everything you do is saying, is this aligning with my passion? Is this person that wants to invest in my fund, do they really believe in what I'm standing up for? Is this really a concept that I know that in the future they are going to be vocal about it, they're going to promote it? And so when I was going through the whole financial crisis and we were trying to raise funds, and I can give you another entire 2 hours on that experience, but there was a point on one day when I was sitting with actually a client, and my client said, what you really should talk about is not the returns, because the returns are there. I mean, the concept of investing in American small companies, that's already there. I think you should share more about your passion, about the fact that you're adding this whole social impact to your fund, about the fact that you really want to make sure that you're making a difference, because that is what makes you different. And so to circle back a little bit on what you're saying is, when you align your passions with what you're doing, eventually it is going to take off. It is almost guaranteed, because people will see the honesty in it. People will understand this is the reason why this person is doing this.
Now, talking about passions is a perfect segue for Nina, who owns Gallery Diet. Tell me about your business and what you mean for the Wynwood neighborhood here in Miami.
So I own a commercial for-profit art gallery that I opened 6 years ago, right before the market tanked. And this is a very interesting and foreign forum for me, because I'm usually amongst cultural producers. And one of the great things about culture, particularly the visual arts, is historically the leaders in visual culture are women. And, you know, I was at a panel on Saturday where we talked about the fact that, you know, half a dozen of New York's greatest nonprofits, the New Museum, the Studio Museum in Harlem, PS1, which is now an affiliate of MoMA, they were all started by women. But the question for us in culture is, how do we turn our cultural capital into financial capital? And how do we do that without sacrificing our passions and our ideologies and our commitments, you know, that we've made as kind of part of this sector? And so I think, you know, we sort of attack that approach by learning from the other more corporate sectors that, you know, that you all are a part of here. And I think everything that you're saying resonates, you know, completely, because that, for me, is what I see as the future. You know, that this idea that you don't have to compromise the ideals or the ideologies, whether they pertain to you as an individual or as a mother or your company or your fund or your nonprofit. You know, you don't have to sacrifice those things to be able to succeed. In fact, you have to amplify them. And those are really the things that carry you through the recessions and the downtimes. And that's what I found with my gallery. People say that to me all the time. How did you open an art gallery in 2007 when by the end of 2008 everyone was sort of trimming the fat and the first thing to go is culture? And, you know, it's just a matter of being patient and persistent.
Now I want to ask you, we heard 3 wonderful success stories. You know, everything that you said sounds great, but there's also a downside to all that. There are many things that you girls have sacrificed in order to get what you have. Me personally, my mom, she's, you know, lives in Latin America. She always says to me in Spanish, "La cuerda se tiene que romper por algún lado." You know, you can't. The rope always has to break. You know, sort of one side. You can't like work out and have the relationship and have the career and, you know, be very popular, go to all the events. You have to prioritize. So what did you give up, you know, that might be something useful for the audience here? What decision did you sort of have to make in order to have, you know, the successful life that you have now?
You know, a lot of people talk about balance. I mean, some people believe that you can balance. I really don't, and I've learned to live with it. I've you know, come to accept the fact that certain points in my life I have to pay more attention to my work, and then, you know, and unfortunately, you know, there's only 24 hours in a day and so much energy, so obviously you have work and you have kids, you know, so a lot of times, you know, that's why I also rely on my husband to make sure that somebody's covering there. But then, you know, you have to, there's other times that you have to refocus on the kids when you see that something's going on there. And then, you know, I really have never found a perfect point that I can say, oh, everything's going great at work, everything's going great with the kids, you know, but you just learn to live with their, or at least I've learned to live with the fact that there probably won't be a perfect balance, at least not in this point in my life with little kids and work and everything that I have to, you know, that I have to do at this point. I think you just have to learn to accept that instead of trying to focus on obtaining, to me, an unachievable goal of having perfect life-work balance.
You don't necessarily have to agree with me. I think that women, you know, that having it all really is possible. You know, that's
Well,
also,
you know, I think it's a changing dynamic. I think having it all physically, I don't think that even happens for men. It's just a function of figuring out at what point in your time, in your life, are you focusing on family? Are you focusing on getting the next deal? Are you focusing on fundraising? You know, I was 6 months pregnant and I was closing my second, I'm working on my second fund. Would I have been able to do that even 5 years ago? No. The world is changing, and for the better. And so the question is, do we have to have that zero-sum version of it, or you need to give up something to get something else? I think that mentality in general needs to change, because that in itself is not really how you should look at things. You should look at things as, let me program myself, let me figure out at what point do I need to focus more time. You know, we need to travel a lot, for example, for the fund. I need to be in Mexico, I need to be in Colombia. And I need to figure out my calendar so that everyone around me, my husband, my nanny, my child, everyone is in coordination. If I have a flight that gets delayed from New York to Miami or from Bogota to Miami, yes, it's a problem because it's affecting everyone that works, that helps me, where I am today. But does that mean that I'm giving up one thing to have the other? No. It just means you get better at balancing. And we all are good at that. We know that.
We're all very good at planning.
I think I've just kind of given up on trying to separate life and work. And, coming to the realization that my phone is always on and, my clients are at our birthday parties and Sunday is a work day too when it has to be. It's just less stressful that way, and I think if you start to, going back to this idea of passion, if you are passionate about what you're doing, you kind of fold it in, and at least in terms of what I do, I think of it as having an artful life, and sort of our best friends participate in that in all types of ways. And, it can be difficult because there are moments when you say to yourself, I just want to play or I just want to work or, I want these things to be separate, but it's a more realistic way to live today, I think, than trying to say to yourself, this is the boundary of where one thing ends and the other begins.
Now I want to open it up to something that I titled, If I Had Known Then What I Know Now. Is there something that you want to communicate to the young women here that you would have wanted to hear when you were sort of trying to make it in each of your different industries?
Well, first of all, which was my original point, it is crucial to have a mentor and a sponsor. Although, like Sharon Sandberg said, you can't really go out there like, will you be my sponsor, will you be my sponsor, will you be my sponsor? You really just have to work hard, but keep your eye open around you to the people, that are above you in your organization, to target those persons, if possible, by obviously working hard, and trying to help them out too.
Did you have and this was my prior question, did you have a formal conversation to formalize that relationship?
Never. That's I wasn't looking. I was really just, here it's very hierarchical. So there's assignments. You get assignments. I was lucky in the sense that, I'm from Guatemala. And I have a business background, so I kind of fit into the mold of Patricia's team. So it worked out very well. It was unconscious. I was really just very lucky and blessed that it turned out that way. Now looking back, I realize that. But if I have to tell anybody, most people probably, unfortunately won't be as lucky as I was. So you really have to do a lot more work to be a little bit more conscious about your career path inside of a firm. So that's number one. And then number two, which I've tried to mention, is you really can't do everything. So, support from other people is crucial. I really have to talk myself down and tell myself all the time, the kids are going to be fine if it's my husband that's doing the homework with them. It doesn't have to be me doing the homework with them. As long as they get the homework done, it's fine. They'll be fine. They get just as much from my husband or other people as they do from me, and I'm obviously there for the important moments, which are important to me as well. But
you can't control everything.
You can't control everything. You can't do everything, and that's something that I have to be telling myself all the time, because obviously everybody here has that certain type of personality that you feel like that you have to be the one there controlling everything and doing everything for them as well, and at work too, which for me is impossible. So.
I would say, be very strategic about your relationships. If I had someone that could have told me that when I was 22, I think, this mountain that I'm climbing and this kind of opportunity that I'm taking on would have been completely different. Because, you go through life, you go, to school, you have a career, but there's one thing that's very important is you're accumulating this amount of knowledge as you're going through your career. It's kind of the jungle gym that they said in the whole lean in concept with Sheryl Sandberg, right? Your career is not that linear. And so as you're going through your career, you're acquiring assets and talents that you have no idea how important they might come into the game 10 years down the road. You have no idea. And so when you're going through your career, don't say, oh, I did that, that doesn't matter. I was working for this company, it doesn't matter. Then you go on to another company, oh, that doesn't matter. There is a point in time where you have an aha moment, and you're able to take what you have learned over the course of your career, and you gotta be smart enough to take it, wrap it up in a bow tie, and create a very big present out of it. Because that is when the rubber hits the road. Because at that point is when, okay, you are now self-aware of it. Now you know what you have. Now you know what you bring to the table. But then the next step is, what are you going to do with it? I'll leave it there.
I think I would have given myself a more realistic timeline. Like anyone, when you're young, you think 2 years is an eternity, and if you don't have it all done and figured out by then, and if you haven't decided on the next move, and I think the common thread that we've heard from everyone today has been that these paths are non-linear, and that takes time to unfold. And when I first, I opened my space when I was 22, so when I first opened, I thought, by the end of this year, this will happen, by the end of this year, that will happen, and I think setting realistic expectations helps you achieve the balance that we were talking about, previously.
So I wanted to open it up for questions now, just so we have time to hear from everybody. Are there any questions?
Hi, I'm Nadia again. I work as a creative at Alma Advertising, and I'm waiting for a microphone.
Hello. I have a question about, you guys have talked a lot about mentorship, but there are two entrepreneurs on the panel, and I wanted to hear a little bit more about mentorship in your lives, if you had any, or if you just consider strategic relationships. I don't know.
I think when you're in the corporate route or in the kind of professional route, I think mentorships are absolutely necessary. You need to understand what those are and know who you want as a mentor. When you become an entrepreneur, you are creating a new path. And so the concept of mentorship is more of sponsorship. Who is the person that is going to be giving you, and remember, time is something that sometimes is worth more than money. Who is the person that's willing to give you their time so that you can accomplish and do what you want to do? And for me, that switch from when I first of all, I was not very good in the career path because I was not training very well to look for mentors and all that. But then when I became an entrepreneur, I was like, oh, now I know why. I'm an entrepreneur at heart. But being an entrepreneur, I've been able to find key persons in my kind of career where it's not necessarily that they spend 5 months with me or are sitting on my board or I get to see them on a daily basis, but they have been critical people that have come into my path and that has said one of two things. One, I really like what you're doing, keep it going. And that to me is like, oh, okay, that's great. I'm going in the right path. And the second was, can I help? And those two comments, when you're an entrepreneur, is amazing. Because, again, you need to learn and see the opportunity when it crosses your path and say, you know what, yes, I would love to have, if I can call you on this, is it okay if I can speak to you about, a transaction that I'm doing? I would love to know what your opinion is. And you would be surprised how many people are willing to actually give you those 5 minutes or give you that dinner and offer their help and offer their expertise, because at the end of the day, that's really their legacy. If you become successful and they're a part of your success, that is the most beautiful check that someone can have and say, wow, I helped that happen.
In the art world, this idea of mentorships doesn't, it applies specifically to artists, but not to arts administrators and, definitely not in the business side of it. But I think what you can take in the arts from people is advice, casual, a couple of sentences at a dinner party. You would be amazed at what people will tell you in just, a few short minutes that can make a huge impact. And sometimes for me that's come from it's actually never come from other dealers. It's always come from either very well-known artists or, people in philosophy or people in art history or people in the museum world that have said things like, I really like what you're doing, have you looked at this, and maybe for us it's really more a model of reference, because what we do is so much about taking what is art historical and building on it. And so I think when somebody gives you a tip, did you see what this dealer did in the 70s with this show, or have you looked at this gallery in Estonia or something like that, you might get kind of a leg up on something. But that's been my experience. And yeah, I mean, there's really no, unfortunately, if you're in a gallery that is operating kind of under the umbrella of another one, then you're probably not doing very interesting work in that, it's just the way that our field works.
Does anybody have any other questions? Over here?
Thank you. This is not about politics. It's about economics. I think Angela mentioned that her mother told her, being economically independent is very important for a woman. So I wondered if any of you have any advice to women, like how to avoid bad financial decisions, pitfalls, and how you can get money to start your own business. I mean, I think it's just such a, basic question of like, how do you get on in this world economically?
So that's sort of two different questions. One is, what should you do financially? And the other one is, how do you take risk, I'm assuming, if you ever want to jump on your own. For your own financials, I think, number one, you need to learn how to make a living according to your earnings. So don't spend more than what you're making. That's number one. It's math 101. What's coming in, do not spend more than what's coming in. Always kind of stay there. Number two, I would say, if you ever want to jump ship and be the entrepreneur and run your own business, it goes in two stages. The first stage really is all about your execution and your reputation. That is worth more than anything else, because if you're going to go and execute and if you're going to go and do something, it is your career. It's pretty much a zero-sum game. You don't do well, you don't deliver, that's it, that's the end of the line. And with that said, there is a certain point in your career that is apt for you to be able to take risks. Some people can take risks in their early 20s. If you're in the technology sector, if you find funding, you go to Silicon Valley and there's venture capital and there's a lot of that going on. If you are, in the medical industry and you want to start your own practice, every career or every path has its own kind of way of developing and a point at which people are willing to invest in you. So depending on your career and depending on your path, you need to assess what that is. What is it that you're bringing to market so that people can invest in you? And I would say that pretty much is a component. So it's more understanding risk than the actual kind of finances.
When I started, I wasn't interested in having an investor, because what happens in the gallery world is you have collectors who become overly enthusiastic about somebody's program, usually a director at another gallery, and then they say, I will be the silent partner, and the silent partner is never really silent. And as it continues, and the gallery gets better known, this is a huge debt that you owe someone, and you've given them all of your relationships and the relationships with your artists, and there's really not an easy way to recover from that. So I actually took an artwork that I had bought when I was in high school that had appreciated in value and sold it and used that as the seed money to open my space. And I just did it very, very, very modestly with no other employees and almost no expenses, and just did it as, kind of small as I could afford, with this idea that you don't spend more than you take in, and also that the model for the gallery can't kind of supersede where you are in your career. You can't run a Barbara Gladstone when you're starting out and you're 22 with a staff of 10. It's not a good idea. And there were a lot of galleries right at that time that had expanded in 2007. They had originally been small startups, and by the summer of 2008, there were about 15 galleries that were kind of the top end of the emerging galleries in New York and LA that were all closing because they had just gotten too big. Their expenses were too big for their markets. So.
Anybody have any other questions? Susan, you have a question.
I have a question. How are you engaging younger women? So you're a generation, probably 2 generations below me, a generation below many of the women here, and now you have a generation or behind you. And how are you engaging and supporting those women?
Well, I pretty much I'm the president of a chapter here in Miami called 85 Broads. And this was an organization that was started originally by the partners of Goldman Sachs, I would say back in the late 90s. And my personal connection, with the founder, Janet Hansen, was when I started Goldman, I was just out of college, and, here I was, a 21-year-old, and, they were giving speeches to the analyst class. And of course, I was the only female in kind of the class, and then they said, well, here are the most senior women of the firm. And I remember Janet was there, and she gave a speech. And I said to myself, here I was 21 years old, and I was already cognizant of the fact that I was in an industry where there were just no other people that looked like me, literally. And I remember seeing this lady, and she gave a speech, and she said, well, welcome to Goldman Sachs, and, and so it went on, and this is interesting times. Goldman was still private at the time. It was not a public company, so it was run by partners. And that was the last that I saw of Janet. I saw her give the presentation, and I never really got to see her again. Fast forward to about 15 years later, and here I am in Miami. I'm starting my fund, and I go to this event in New York, and I bump into Janet. And Janet says, hey, I've heard about you. Which, again, from what I was saying before, that's the first good sign, right? She's like, I've heard about you. She's like, I don't have anyone that's running my chapter for 85 Broads in New York. And I said, in Miami, and I said, Janet, I'm trying to raise a fund. I'm really busy. I just got married. I'm going to have interested in having a child, and which I did. My baby's 4 months old. And she said, yeah, but you could take it on. You could take something else on. And at the time, Miami in general had about 3 or 4 women's groups that were here. And I said, I have to try and build a bridge. I was just talking to Nina about this. Between all of the different sectors that we have. Because you have women in arts, you have women in law, you have women in finance. And, where else can I also find access to a pipeline of talent? Because, the facts are the facts. Generation X, which is where I'm part of, 90% of our moms were at-home moms. So we did not have an example of female CEOs. Unfortunately, those are the facts. The Y generation, which is the one that comes after us, they have a little bit more women now. It's 2 to 1. You have women that, moms that are at home, and you have moms that are working, and you have Generation Y that's coming up, graduating from college, and they're like, what are you talking about? My mom worked. I grew up with my mom working. And when I speak to the younger generation, that's the first impact that I get. I'm like, wow, this is really not a major difference. And so, how do you have access to the Y generation? How do you also become an example for them? So one of the ways I'm giving back is by running the Miami chapter for 85 Broads. We invite female CEOs to come and chat, come and speak. For me, I really love it because I get to meet and get to follow kind of the careers of women here in the Miami, which I think honestly would, as we become more multinational and having the language skills and having the cross-border experience, that skill set in itself is becoming much more and more important. And so for that reason alone, I think the Miami market is going to be a huge supplier in terms of talent for multinationals.
There's a young women's group that's for museum professionals that are just women, and I do a lot of events with them at the gallery, and we always we champion women artists. 40% of our roster are women artists, and they're of all generations. The one that's currently showing is 83, so maybe not young women, but she is a good role model for other young women artists to see. And it's just, for me, it's about keeping it an active part of our everyday, and not necessarily saying we represent 40% women, but these are the artists we represent.
Well, unfortunately, in our profession, it's a little bit more difficult just because we are in a very demanding profession that is not necessarily driven by us, but is driven by the clients, same as the bankers. And we've been having a lot of discussions with experts. It's not only a women's issue; it's a Gen Y issue, and how basically, at least the model of the big law firm doesn't really fit into the mold of the Gen Y, and they want better quality of life and meaning to their work. And we talked about what a law firm is like for the first year, so it is very difficult. We do what we can with the women, obviously, to try to motivate them, and technology is a great thing. So we are, Patricia's always been of the mentality that as long as the work gets done, we don't care when you get it done. If you have to go home to your kids and then work after they're in bed, that's fine with us, as long as it gets done. But again, it's the clients that drive the work, unfortunately. So there is only a certain degree of flexibility that we can have inside of a large law firm, at least in the current model. I don't know if, not that the Gen Y model is coming up, if that's going to drive the change inside of the big law firms and probably the banks and other institutions that don't necessarily fit into, the jobs that Gen Y wants to do.
I have a question. It's more of an audience question than a moderator question. And something that you said, Jocelyn, really resonated with me. I'm part of the millennial generation. So my mom, she always used to say in Spanish, again, la cocina embrutece. Go work, study, be ambitious. So I never learned how to cook. I never learned how to take care of my house. She never thought that I would be 28 years old, 29 years old, not married, living by myself. How important is it, and you that have young daughters, how important is it to also be self-sufficient at the home, to know how to cook? Is it important at all, or should we just focus on the professional side of things?
Well, I love to cook, so I really do. I love to cook, I love to bake, but that's just my personal preference. I think the previous moderator mentioned that she really just wants to impart on her daughters to be happy, whatever that means, and I completely agree with that.
So cooking is not in my nature.
No, of course. If you enjoy it, go ahead and do it, but if not, of course, it's definitely not part of something that you need to do or need to be married by a certain age, or at least that's not from where I'm coming from. I guess I agree with you. I think that's I'm sure my mom worked when I was younger. Parents were divorced, so she worked. But even then, as liberal as she was, I'm sure she would have been a little bit worried if I hadn't gotten married, but I'm not of that philosophy. I don't think that you need to be married. I don't think you need to have kids. It's whatever their choice is.
Yeah, I agree with that thought. Please do not get married because you're thinking you're getting older, or because, you're running out of your time for having children. Please do not fall into that mindset. Life is a very long time. And who you marry really is important about how they're going to support you in what you're doing. Do you agree in the mindset of your values? Do you share the same values? Because that is really, at the end of the day, what is going to lead you into old age, into having children, and the whole, let's just speak the facts. Being in Latin America, you're kind of breaking tradition of what is the traditional female role and what is the traditional male role. But I think actually, and that's the reason why we have 4 female presidents. I think it's actually something that LATAM is embracing that change, because when when the men are seeing that women can actually acquire the same salaries or very high salaries, and the women are traveling, and it becomes tag team. I go to dinners with my husband, and we're both talking about, well, let's figure out where do you want to take your business, and where do I want to take your business. And he's my biggest mentor. He's my biggest challenge. He challenges me on all the things I'm thinking and all the things I'm saying. And I challenge him, and I say, well, why are you doing this way? Why? And I cannot imagine if I would be in a relationship where that type of mindset and that conversation is not the core, is not the center of it. And as I see my friends too, working in the 4th floor, there's the 3rd floor, getting to the 4th floor. All my friends, I have half that are not married, and I have half that are married. There's no difference. Be with the person for the right reasons. Don't be with the person for the wrong reasons.
I think our moms may have grown up together because my mom said, be financially independent and then you can eat out and hire a housekeeper and you'll be fine. And we grew up eating, TV dinners, and my dad cooked on Sunday, and what he cooked was grilled cheese and ice cream floats. And I actually love to cook, and I taught myself how to cook, and I really enjoy entertaining for friends and kind of doing all of that now. But I think it's that knowing it's a choice is what makes it enjoyable, and I would hope to that that's something that is passed on to the next generation as well.
Anybody else have any questions? One question over here.
There's a mic coming. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I have a question, and it's been something that's been touched upon by the different panels, and I just wanted to know if you had any additional insights, tips, and it's the idea of when you're a young professional, and I'm in banking, so I understand your point between the parallels between banking and the law field. It's a very male dominated industry, and how have you been able to manage to differentiate being overly ambitious, which sometimes is something you hear as a young woman? There's a certain rite of passage, there's a certain dues you have to pay, and still be able to get ahead and be ahead of the trend. I mean, some of you are entrepreneurs. What are some of the things you've learned how to still get ahead and not step on toes, and really do what you truly want to do? Do you have any tips, any suggestions? And what has been your experience?
I think you can, in my personal experience, that's relatable most in terms of my clients, because, a lot of my clients are men in their 60s who are at the very, very tops of their fields, and they know exactly, where they're coming from, what they're doing. They are the boss, and they have been for a very long time, and they're coming to me into an environment that can feel very hostile, where they know absolutely nothing, and they're being asked to spend a lot of money, and the person giving them advice is 29 and a woman. And so I find that the best way to counter that is with personality and knowledge. And when you're good at what you do, the people that are smart enough to listen to that and take your advice are going to be smart enough and listen. And the people that aren't, whether it's your boss or it's a client, means they're not a good fit for you, and then it's time to change firms or banks or clients.
Your question was referring to how to deal with men in general, or how to be strategic? Because I want to be specific to your question.
I don't think it's gender oriented. I think a lot of the times, and another panelist mentioned it, when a woman in a younger age is overly ambitious, you might be referred as, someone said the word earlier. So how do you get ahead, and how do you tackle people that might be older, that not necessarily older, but have been in the industry longer, and get that attention that you need? Or
so there's one additional work that you need to do. Every time you're going to sit in a meeting with someone, whether they are one generation older than you, 2 generations older than you, or in politics or in banking or in finance, you have to do your homework. You need to know what it is that moves that person. I'll tell you, at this point, I have not had a single meeting with any possible prospect into my fund where I do not know what moves that person. Everybody's a human being. Everybody has a passion in life, whether it's children, whether it's art. Some people are very well connected to their alumni association. Some people are connected to their city. Some people are connected to the women's issues. Some people, and this holds true for both men and women. So if you are sitting in a meeting where it is, all new faces, you need to stay up the night before and you need to read up every single person that's going to be in that meeting. Unfortunately, it's a little bit more work, so that when you have catch conversations or catch phrases and that person talks to you, oh, I was just in New York, oh, I was just in London, or I was just in the opening of a museum, you have the catch. You are aware of what it is that moves that person. And if you do your homework before, you will then get to a point where it becomes natural to you. Because you will never attend a meeting where you just have not done the homework before. You have to know who's going to be sitting there. And if you don't know who's in front of you, that's why we have iPads and that's why we have Google, and you have to do that. And in today's world, I think understanding the social networks too that people belong to. If you are in a dinner in Bogota, what does that mean? If you are in, I always talk about, when you're trying to close deals, whether it's in Mexico City, whether it's in Brazil, whether it's in Bogota, whether it's in Santiago, I mean, the type of conversations that you have, how you have them, the intonations, all of these things are relevant. And for us to say, oh, we're in different times, that's not, it is. It is really important. If you're going to close a deal in Mexico City, you need to understand what that means. If you're going to go to Sao Paulo and you don't, understand a little bit on the Portuguese or the culture component or the fact that they're having a World Cup next year, you need to know these things. And nowadays, that is what gives you the edge. You need to have all of those concepts under your wings, and you need to know them fully what that means. That's it.
Well, I don't think there's anything wrong with being ambitious. I know where you're coming from and you shouldn't change. I don't think any of the women in the previous panel or in this panel probably, I think we're all ambitious, and you just unfortunately, have other people that are trying to say bad things about that, part of you, but it's a good thing. It's really a good thing to be ambitious, and it's going to get you where you want to go. Otherwise, you're not going to get there. Unfortunately, we're in a male-dominated industry, so that we're kind of having to navigate, in a place where, in a form that's not traditionally the way women act. Or I don't know how to say it properly, but I hope that one day we're in an environment where it's mostly women, so that you feel you can act naturally and everybody will appreciate you. And I think the way that that's going to happen is if there's more women at the top. But for now, I don't think you should worry about what people are perceiving you as. Just keep on working hard, because that's the most important thing. And keep on being ambitious, because it's really going to take you to the top. Without that, you're not going to get ahead in the banking industry.
Okay. Well, I think we covered a lot of ground today, and will you be hanging around at the cocktail? Yes, so you can approach them, I guess, individually if you have additional questions. And thank you for listening and participating.